No, they took down that.
Christine, were you going to say something? Should we start? Or?
I see that there's still some people who are finding their way back. Mike is on. Thank you for giving me your attention so we can begin the next session. This afternoon, we're going to have a panel for an hour of coffee break, so don't worry, you're going to get a coffee break at the atrium right below, and if you don't already have a coupon, Marcia has those. And we're going to hear from our panelists here for about an hour, have a break, and then more sessions in the afternoon. I think I've now got your attention. Thank you. Welcome back.
All right, everyone, so we've got the topic that is probably something most of us have heard from someone, be they very involved in the business or even just mildly associated with the concepts of AR, which is, of course, trust. What we can do to actually trust what we're involved with, working with, to rely on, to feel that is secure, safe, etc. And so for that, we've actually got three wonderful panelists to give us their thoughts and ideas on it. We've got Joe, Kevin, and Jules. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by allowing them to focus a little bit on the questions involved. And first I'm going to turn to Joe. Joe is Chief Technologist at the Center for Democracy and Technology, and that's a nonprofit. It's dedicated to ensuring that the internet remains open, free, and innovative. So he's looking at ensuring that all the technology and technical considerations that we're working with are appropriately embedded in the legal environments and in the policy environments we need to make sure that we move forward, not backward. So Joe, when you think of trust and you think of AR, what comes to mind?
So trust is an enormous concept, and the keyest part, most key part of that to me and to us is the privacy side. Specifically, to what extent are things that are captured or annotated or enhanced by augmented reality platforms something that's not in the interest of the other people participating in them. And we have seen some pretty strong reactions to some sort of early augmented reality platforms like Glass. Right? There's the efforts to a variety of places to not allow people with Glass in certain areas. But I'm a technologist and I work in a digital civil liberties organization. You can think of me as sort of half a computer scientist, half a lawyer, but I used to be an astrophysicist too, and I've done quite a bit of work in the social scientists with qualitative methods and mixed methods. And so when I think about society's reaction to new technologies, I tend to think about them from sort of this weird anthropological physicist kind of perspective. And privacy is a pretty curious thing. And trust, you can imagine, is even more curious to someone with a sort of hard science physics background. As humans, we have a few 100,000 years already of experience with non-augmented reality, right? And we evolved with the main senses we have. Technology can add or enhance those senses, or create new ones. Like just being able to annotate your environment with information is not really any of those senses that we're sort of involved with. And if you think like humans did up until recently, what we see is that we have optical light coming from this orb of mostly hydrogen, the sun, coming down, streaming down upon us, bouncing off of us, and we reflect this stuff into your eyes of other humans, right? What that is you're emanating signals, you're emanating light from your body into the environment around you. Over time, we developed strategies, so like hiding behind a rock, or technologies like camouflage, to mediate those signals, to mediate the emanation of those signals into the environment around us. And as we sort of became civilized, we began to do other things like wear clothes and live in dwellings with walls. And these kinds of things, clothes and walls, for example, serve a variety of purposes to keep us warm, for example. But they also provide space we need to separate intimate details of our life that we may only want to share with friends, lovers, family, separate the intimate details from things that are available in general in public. So as a physicist would say, I think we've learned how to sort of mediate the signals we emanate from our bodies and our property in order to have a productive, healthy, and comfortable society and economy. We can apply this kind of stuff to digital, the web, for example, or to augmented realities, and think, to what extent do we have the experience or the tools we need to properly mediate or participate in either the signals we emanate or things that people are doing when we participate in their augmented reality environments. People stop.
Fair enough way to do it. I think it's almost to me as if you're saying we need some sort of coping strategy and we need coping mechanisms. Would you say that's sort of a fair way to think of it? That in the same way that we have sort of naturally evolved these things in a sort of anthropological way over time, our technology is accelerating the schedule, but we can't accelerate the coping mechanism? Do you think that's one way to think of it?
Absolutely. I think that coping is a great way. I would have said mediation or mitigation strategies, but coping is much more intuitive in the sense that what would be helpful to be able to do is enfranchise those around us that are in our field of view if we're using a visual augmented reality environment or something like that. And say things like, this device helps me remember names and faces and contact details. Do you mind if I use it for that purpose? And people might say, well, of course, naturally, whatever. But when they think what's happening is, they're recording the fact I was in a bar and you can count the shots of tequila I took or something like that. Maybe we're not fully prepared to have that level of detail anywhere.
And that's the question of what becomes private and public and private. And these are things we're going to be weighing as we start augmenting the reality we already have. There's a wonder in richness and there's a peril in richness. And how do we cope with that? And I think that's part of the challenge. So I'm going to move on here and allow Kevin to say a few words and introduce himself. And in this sense, I think I'm going to challenge him also to sort of maybe expand a little bit on the thoughts that we've had so far. And Kevin is the founder and executive director of the Center for Spatial Law and Policy. And he also works at a firm called GeoLaw. And his role right now is he's advising businesses and governments on legal issues associated with the fact that we're collecting, storing, using, and distributing information about location and other geospatial aspects of our lives. So he's talking about this all around the world and addressing these issues of privacy, national security and liability, and how even geospatial technology is going to work as it now moves into the courts, into law, and into cases. Kevin?
Thank you. And so I first of all want to thank you for this opportunity to speak. And so when I was asked to speak on this panel, the first thing I tried to think about was the word trust. And as a lawyer, trust is not something that you necessarily think of. I also had the question about where is this trust taking place? And I think as folks in your shoes, are you trusting the people who are using the augmented reality to use it properly? Is it the general public who is trusting the people who are using the augmented reality to use it responsibly? Or is it the government or governments that are trusting you, basically, to develop applications and solutions that are balanced and deal with some of the issues? And so I think that's the first thing that struck me, and I'm not sure that we want to talk about that now, but I think it is something going forward you may want to keep in mind when you use the term trust. So I had a little trouble trying to think about what to say, and we just have a few minutes, but for a couple of reasons. One, augmented reality is a really big space, right? As many of you know. And it's more than just cameras on glasses or facial recognition software. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can look at augmented reality. So one of the things I looked at as I started at the source of all knowledge, which is Wikipedia, and looked up the definition of augmented reality. And when you look at it that way, you look at sort of taking real life and reality, if you will, and then augmenting it with additional information. So, and to follow on the earlier topic about privacy being the big issue, what are some of the privacy issues associated with real life, real reality for me. And I think there are a couple that we can talk about, is this different expectation of privacy in the public space as compared to privacy in the private space. We've lived a certain way expecting that. Courts and laws have developed a certain way around that principle. But that's changing, and that's something that the geospatial community is struggling to deal with. That's going to change. And so when you think about reality and augmentation, keeping that in mind, the expectation that people have about their privacy in public spaces is changing, so we need to keep that in mind. And then I think it's also important to distinguish between a person and an object, right? So when we start looking at an augmented world, we just tend to think about privacy around a person, but increasingly privacy has been associated with it, our smartphones, mobile devices, but it's going to be our house, right? You're driving down the street and it comes up on your auto screen that there's a registered sex offender that lives there. Does that impact the privacy of individuals who live there if that data is wrong or updated? Then looking at augmentation. So what are the concerns about augmentations? And I guess I have a couple of thoughts that I would have. Are you augmenting with public data or are you augmenting with private data? Right? And so the first question is, do we have augmentation? Is there an expectation of privacy or trust with public data? Well, there's two issues with that. One is increasingly, yes. So if you think about the New York gun map, where a newspaper, I forget which county it was taking public data and putting that on a map and showing that to people, there was a lot of concerns about privacy associated with that, even though that was considered public data. I think you can expect the same concerns with augmented reality as you start to do that. And then you start thinking about how is this private data obtained, right? So you start thinking about what is the definition of public data? Is it because it's on Facebook? Is it because it's on Twitter? Does that make it public or does that make it private? And the privacy world is sort of grappling with that, and that's going to really impact the work that you do going forward and going to impact your concept of trust. So just real quickly, just three sort of thoughts that I had, and then I'll finish up. To think about as you move forward, and then this will vary between the jurisdictions that you're doing business with and even within particular individuals that you're dealing with. But when does the display of augmented public data of someone who is in the public violate that individual's privacy? So in this case, it's just displaying it on your screen. I think another aspect is, if or when does the sharing of that information, of augmented public data, does that violate or potentially violate that individual's privacy? So distinguishing between me, the user, looking at it and saying, driving by and saying, okay, there's a registered gun owner, or sharing that with someone else, and does that infringe their privacy or violate their trust, if you want to insert trust there? And I think another question that we'll need to deal with is there appropriate time when displaying or using, augmenting with private data? Is that worth violating or potentially violating that individual's privacy? And that's something that some of you in the national security space, some of you in the law enforcement, the disaster response space, I think we'll be dealing with in the future. And so then the question, if you answered yes to that question, it becomes, when is it appropriate and by whom? And again, that'll go to the trust, I think, as well.
So I think, all of those, I think that's absolutely true. And these are all things we have to examine. And when I think about it too long, my brain starts hurting. But one thing I also think about when I look at the considerations is that I don't think it's necessarily one size fits all. So one question I have for you, Kevin, is, when we look at this, and especially looking at people who are developing augmented tools out there now with this audience, are we delivering an augment, or is there, for instance, a filter that you turn on that says, you're under 18, you won't see this information, you're over this age, you will see it. Is there anything like that we have to think about? Is it really a one answer on privacy, or is it a multi-answer, and how do we think about that?
I think two thoughts. No, two thoughts. I mean, I think there are going to be multi-layered privacy. We're already sort of moving to that in a lot of aspects. So multi-layered privacy in terms of the layers of data, in terms of who has access to what, and all that is certainly going to develop. And I think you also always need to think about the individual. Certainly children or minors or something that are going to get greater protection no matter where you live. So you need to keep that in mind. And I do think, third, I think there are going to be technological solutions to this type of thing. So you could see it, in just it's not going to work when you're driving, if someone decides that it's a distraction. Or it's not going to work around a school if you think that it's going to be something violating privacy. I mean, there are technological solutions that you can build in. I think if I was in your shoes, and one of the things that I try to, suggest is start thinking about those things. There aren't any answers right now, or there are more questions than answers is probably the best way to describe it. But it's better to start thinking about it, working that into your systems. You're not going to get them all right, but you'll have a good argument as to why you did it a certain way. You probably get it right more often than wrong. And given that we're so far ahead of legal and policy communities, that's probably the best you can hope for right now.
That's true. A lot of technology is running ahead, and how do we all play catch up? And certainly, I think that's something that Jules has thought about a great deal. Jules Planetsky is the executive director and co-chair of the Future of Privacy Forum. And that's a think tank that seeks to advance responsible data practices, okay? And their current projects are focusing on things like online data use, smart grid, mobile data, big data, apps, and social media. And the Future of Privacy Forum is a conglomeration of more than 60 leading companies that are helping them to examine these questions. So I'm sure Jules has thought about this more than once, and I'm curious to hear what he thinks about trust and AI.
Thanks, and thanks for the opportunity. So we try to very much be the centrist voice in privacy. We're industry supported, but our board members are generally the chief privacy officers of lots of the large companies, from the Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Yahoos, to companies that are tracking your phone when you move around indoor spaces to create analytics reports about hotspots and wait times online. The other half of our board are advocates and academics, and we take very seriously the fact that they are stakeholders, and we're not there to just speak for industry, but to speak for folks who want to move the ball forward and put appropriate structures in place. I was the chief privacy officer at AOL and at DoubleClick and a state legislator and a consumer affairs commissioner, and I learned that that I've got to think about trust in two very different ways. First, let's talk about the policymakers and whether they trust you people building technology, you people using data. Guess what? They don't. You're bad people who sell data to data brokers, and you do behavioral advertising, and you track people, and it's creepy, and it might be used for denying people insurance or selling them mortgages that aren't the right ones. If you're not doing things that are possibly already illegal, you're at least enforcing society's biases by algorithms that compound the negative things. And they read reports that say, hey, when you type a black name into Google, it's more likely to offer you ads for look up the police records of this person. And Google says, we don't have any biases. That must be what the algorithm is learning from what people put in. And the advocate says, aha, see, you're endorsing and propagating these bad biases. And the voice of industry when it comes to privacy for the past 10 years has been behavioral advertising and data brokers. That's who shows up in DC and tells policymakers, stop trying to regulate us. Everything is good. We're just keeping the internet free by putting ads. And if not for us, everyone would be paying for every website that they went to. And so there is a giant overhang of negativity in Washington today, and folks who are truly trying to save the world, not simply build a cool new product that might enhance a game, but people who are actually trying to improve healthcare are being told, but that data might be used for marketing. Yeah, but I need the data to figure out which people had which disease and how to learn, in the world of personalized medicine. So there is a giant boulder that lots of, not that the advertising people aren't legitimate, they have a role in the world, but there are lots of people who truly are trying to improve education. Right? I just came from a meeting with a whole bunch of companies that are providing education technology. They want to do personalized learning. They want to say, why does the teacher not know that this was the problem you had in math? All they know is you got a B, as opposed to, no, you did really well, but there was this one concept, right? That's lost. Why doesn't the curriculum automatically pick that up? The data is there somewhere, probably. Increasingly, it's being captured. And they're being told, oh no, you might sell the data. Oh no, it's going to be in the cloud, and who knows what will happen to it there. And so there is a giant overhang, and we need to be really, really careful about how we portray what we do so that policymakers understand the benefits and don't break things. Now here's the good news. They can't get anything done whatsoever in Washington, so they can't break too many things. The states, however, do things because they don't think so hard, and they rush bills through. I was a state legislator, I was 27, you came to me with an idea, I'm against that, I'll put in a bill. And yesterday in Maryland, we were dealing with a bill. There are folks who don't like the fact that you can track a MAC address when someone moves around the store. And so, okay, fine. We recognize there's issues with it. That's why we did a code around it. Talk to us if you want to do a bill. No, it should be against the law to track a user's phone when they move around the store without certain kinds of warning signs. I'm like, you just banned every Wi-Fi network in Maryland. Do you realize that? No, it's only when you track the phone and track the consumer's behavior. I'm like, what does that mean exactly? I don't know. Well, you just made it against the law. Someone ought to know, right? So trust with the policymakers. We are in a hole, and we've got to figure out how to dig out. The good news is that consumers seem to be a lot more complicated. As much as we, jar them with new things, they still seem to be saying, sure, pick my location. The FTC brought an action against a flashlight app that you may have seen that was giving location to ad networks and wasn't saying why. Okay, they should have said why, and it was considered to be a big omission, and they agreed to a settlement. But I kept thinking, who are these consumers who were asked to give location to a flashlight app? What did they think? Were they like, oh, maybe it'll help me find an outlet to, charge? Like, what did they actually think? They probably just, you ask, you don't ask. Do I know who this company is? No, it's just some flashlight. So the good news is that consumers, as much as we complain, and they all complain about Facebook, but today when I woke up, I got on Facebook, and there was a dinosaur. Anybody see the dinosaur today on Facebook? Okay. Anyone shared publicly on Facebook, or are you all good privacy people? You're good. Okay, so I share publicly often because I'm out there promoting what I have to say and do. So anyone who shares publicly on Facebook got a little warning today. Hey, and it was a little dinosaur. Hey, we noticed you're sharing publicly. Do you really want to be sharing publicly? If so, cool. If not, you can adjust your settings. And I was like, oh, now I trust you, Facebook, right? Because you seem to be provoking me to not be public. So that's interesting, and I assume they'll be doing more of that. And so I think the challenge for consumers is to kind of pick up on what we said earlier. Consumers have a mental model of how the world works, right? And it may not be right. They may not completely understand what happens behind a website. They may not understand the technology they see. So they have some model. And when we shift the model, sometimes it's just instantly all good and we love it. And sometimes it's a little bit jarring, but we adjust to it and we like it. I hated the Facebook newsfeed, to stick with that for a second, when they turned it on. I said, that's a big privacy invasion. You go and look at your face, and all of a sudden you go and you see all this stuff about your friends. That was a big change. I'm against that. That should be opt-in. And Facebook said, well, then no one will opt in, and then no one will appreciate what it is like. So we got to throw people into the pool, and they all screamed and yelled, and then they started saying, cool, I really like this. I'm going back and back, and they're hooked on it. So we've got a challenge with policymakers. The consumers, however, seem to be delighted when we do something interesting. They adjust sometimes when it's jarring, and then sometimes we get a backlash, and policymakers jump in, or technology responds and says, no, ask nicely before a location can be handed on.
Well, let's build on that for a second, Jules, because, when you're talking about how when people think about this privacy, the first thing they think about is advertisements, and that's true. I mean, they're confrontational, they're in your face, you are confronted with them every single time you work. However, what's out there to show people the value add that we know is being built by the data? How do people find out that? It's actually much more intuitive, much more under the ground. You're seeing the result of the value you give by sharing data, but you're not realizing it is that I'm getting this benefit because I and about a gajillion other people shared some data. How do we make those connections so that, as you say, what people, the lawmakers, the policymakers, and even the users, the first thing that they confront is not necessarily, gosh darn it, advertising is wonderful and we should keep it because it makes things cheap.
Well, don't think your privacy policy is the answer, number one. Don't think your privacy answer is the answer, number one. That's there for the lawyers to document and to have some accountability, so we need them. But that's not to be viewed as your communication mechanism. I like the job Amazon does. I bought 50 Shades of Grey the other day. I wanted to see what the big fuss was about, I admit. And now they're promoting all kinds of other softcore porn to me. They're not embarrassed that even like a sensitive topic. No, they're like, other people like you search for stuff like this. And nobody's saying to me, privacy, data use. It's like, oh, I get what the value equation is. But when Orbitz tailored people's home pages and said, hey, Mac users are cooler than PC people, you like better vacations, so we'll give you a different set of vacations, there was a backlash because they hadn't set the equation. So don't surprise people, or if you surprise them, do it in a delightful way that feels refreshing as opposed to jarring.
I'm going to ask you guys to share the microphone, and I'm going to pass around, a few questions among you. And I think one of the things that always jumps to my mind when we're discussing privacy, security, and trust is I think people tend to be wear relatively rose-colored glasses, be they Google or not, when they're looking at security, trust, privacy. People sort of inherently trust, okay? They put things out there, they assume something right will be done with it, and that's a valuable thing to do. And so, in many ways, what do we do about the issue, exactly as you're saying, Jules, that I don't care if the flashlight knows where I am. I'm just going to tell the flashlight where I am. What do we do in terms of getting people to understand how much of that is at risk because of what their actions are? And how much do you think they truly are getting at?
So we're a global organization increasingly, and that level of trust is not the same everywhere. And I think one of the reasons it's different in the US and in some countries is because we have pretty robust protection mechanisms that make sure that if something that is decidedly against the interests of the consumers is happening, that either the consumers know about it and agree to that, or that those businesses are reprimanded for doing those kinds of things. So I think it's part of the answer, but in general, I really like what Jules is saying about these nudges, these ways of sort of reminding people about the operating environment that they're in, and especially when they're doing something that could have risky implications, remind them, hey, are you aware of this? If you are, that's great. If not, there's ways to change it.
All right, so if we're going to move to an augmented reality, set that as a baseline for a minute, what are the differences that building augmented reality environments and tools have to be considered with that in mind?
I guess, and I'm not sure this is unique to the augmented reality environment, but just in general, my perception is that privacy is the bucket that we throw, privacy concerns are the bucket we throw everything into when it makes us feel uncomfortable. And we can't necessarily define what that uncomfortable thing is, so we call it privacy. And so I think that to follow up what Georgia said, I think part of it is to really do a good job of explaining what the risks are associated with the particular concerns of the technologies that you have. And so, if I read the FTC report or the decision about the flashlight company. I don't know what the risk is to the individual if they give their location when they turn on the flashlight. I just don't know what that is. That wasn't articulated. It was just assumed that that was bad. And most people probably accepted it because they don't care if some guy out in wherever knows where they turn on, they use this flashlight at, right? Now, if they were collecting it other times, and I think there was more to it than that. But so I think part of it is articulating what the particular risk is, understanding it, and then, as Jules said, then figuring out how you help get your customer over the hurdle, right? If this is the particular concern they're going to have, how we get it over there. Now, part of the trust issue, and I think Jules did a good job of explaining to lawmakers who don't trust you. The problem is the media doesn't trust you either, right? In a lot of cases, they're the ones that are out there who are talking about all the potential bad ways that you can use this technology to violate someone's privacy. And so as you become more out in mainstream, commercial mainstream, you're going to have a whole bunch of people, reports on CNN and otherwise, all the different ways that you can violate someone's privacy. And that's where the consumer trust is going to come in. So thinking ahead of, getting in front of that, I think is going to be a challenge. But you're at a point where you can start doing that.
Value matters, right? You deliver some value, suddenly all my other problems seem to go away. So when I get that there's something in it for me, Disney's rolled out, right, a augmented reality touch point now that they've got their magic bands and they're increasingly interacting and adding, a whole layer of higher functionality to the park, whether it's, hidden, little nuggets or, videos that will play on a wall if you stand in front of it, but now it's always sort of been there for those who are the real junkies, but now it's increasingly available to anyone who's got the Magic Band, and they got some negative reaction when policymakers heard about it. You're going to be tracking people in the park, and they said, damn right, people are going to get their fast pass right away, and their lunch will be ready for them when they approach the place. And a picture that's taken when they're coming down the roller coaster will be linked to their identity so that you don't have to go hustle it online, and people are going to love it. And you know what I'm seeing? I'm seeing kids, they haven't fully rolled it out. I see kids wearing it for like 6 months after. Like, you wear the ski thing to show that you've been skiing at Vail or whatever it is. Kids are wearing it, and they've leaned into the value, and as a result, nobody's saying, oh, do they actually know now where people go in the park? And oh, if the princess knows your name, that means now Disney knows your name, and they didn't know your name before. And I don't know if people ever thought about whether Disney knew your name when you were in the park before. And so, a huge part of this is providing value, and then I kind of trust you to do whatever the hell you're going to do. And I learned from experience, right? Did bad things ever happen to me or my friends when they did that? Oh, well, then nobody should do that. And so, the consumer equation, I'd say, you will figure out. You don't need me. I haven't started any billion-dollar companies to tell you how to make products that people want and buy. What I do think I need to tell you is that while you try to do that, and look, that's not perfect, right? There might be too many ads, there might be too many pop-ups. The market will deal with that. What the market won't deal with is the overreaction to the anticipation of, ooh, that could be a bad thing. We need to stop it quickly. And look, the policymakers may not, but the platforms who play a key role, they are responsive to policymakers, right? And we've already seen, Apple or Google, sometimes rightly, and sometimes, well, it's not clear exactly what they're doing. Maybe they ought to be doing more, maybe they're doing less. Responding to concerns about, people are tracking using device identifiers. Oh, no more of that. Okay, so they created a different identifier and they gave people more control, so I think that was the right thing to do. But they feel the pressure. Microsoft, I'll turn Do Not Track on by default, because that's how I'll deal with the privacy concerns that are being thrown at me. And so I think you need to thread that needle of making sure that your value equation is clear so that the parties you rely on, unless you're building your entire ecosystem on your own, if you're going to be dependent on mobile devices or older proximal browsers or whatever it will take in order to kind of fulfill the system, you need to recognize that you're in an ecosystem, and when one part is aching, other parts try to accommodate for it.
Well, but Jules, following on your Disney example, you're talking about it being in the park, that they can track you in the park, and yet here's this kid wearing it 6 months afterwards. Was there somewhere in that compact, the only place we track you is in the park? And this gets to an interesting question about how does location, which is such a huge factor when we're looking at these augmented reality tools that we're developing, how does that play into privacy?
I think it's well, even as we were talking before, people will tell you with just a couple of data points when you start your day, when you end your day, and you go to lunch, that they can identify you with a high degree of precision. In fact, one person who's been saying that now is the chief technology officer for the Trade Commission, right? So she's in a very important position with impacting privacy law, and is very interested in the nexus between privacy and location. So it's a huge aspect of where privacy is going. And to the extent, and since many of you are here through the OGC, location is a big part of what you do. I think it's a big part of the augmented reality. It's a big issue, and it's one that a lot of people are trying to get their heads around. Unfortunately, maybe some of the ones who are trying to get their heads around it are not necessarily the ones who are making the laws, and they're more interested. They're reacting to situations and So it's going to be a real big challenge, and I do think it's something that the augmented reality community needs to keep in mind in everything they do that's dependent on location, and let's say, a lot of it is, that there's that aspect of it, both in terms of the reality part and the augmentation part. And so, again, keeping that data flow in mind as you go forward, I think is going to be very important.
So to us, location is one of a number of more sensitive types of data. And the reason why I put this up there with biometric types of information, health, finance, kids, and stuff. The reason that those are sensitive, they're often very hard for anyone to do much about. So, for example, location, as we know now, because of academic research, it just takes a few sort of points of your regular habits to very accurately predict where you're going to be next week at this time, which means, they know where you are, which could be for a variety of risky kinds of things to happen like that, or more than likely, you're not in other places, like home. There was an effort to highlight this with Foursquare users and showing that people who checked in Foursquare said, please rob me or something because I'm not at home. And like with biometrics, it's another thing you guys will face, gait recognition, facial recognition, things like that. Those are the kinds of things that, I can leave my phone, like I tell journalists who we train, who have to work in very oppressive regimes with very sensitive sources. The best meeting you can have is one where you're basically wearing, the clothes you have with you, and you're not bringing any of your devices with you, because, they could be commandeered or other phones to do things. And so, location is a similar thing, and there are ways of reporting location with a degree of fidelity that is low. Go up to the zip code if that's perfect for your purpose. You start there, and when people demand from government and other stuff, then you go there. But I think starting at a place that is less likely to be so risky is probably a good rule of thumb.
So industry and technologists and so forth all usually say we don't want legislation, we will self-regulate. And then I'm like, well, where are those good rules that will draw reasonable boundaries? And so, in the early days of behavioral ads, you just didn't target people based on what they searched for, AIDS or sexual things or sensitive things. Sports and fitness, and now today, 10 years later, it's, you name it, it's your actual de-identified pharmacy purchases are available to be used to target ads. And then with mobile, well, that's different because that's your cell phone. We get that that's going to be treated more sensibly, and today your location is bought and sold and traded the same way the data points about your cookie-linked information are available, right? The home address of your Wi-Fi router is used as a substitute for your identity, linking your Experian data, linking it then to your ad identifier so that someone can target ads to you as you walk around the world based on linking, because of your location, your third-party purchase data, right? Wow, really? All that just to show me an ad? That's a lot of linking and cracking and doesn't even work, but that's what happens today. And so what I've seen happen, again, over 10 or 15 years is the stuff that was, well, that's like really cool. No one does that, right? And then we kind of get comfortable, and the next thing you know, the bar has moved, and we are, or somebody is, doing some extensively intrusive things. And so my argument is, and look, it's hard to come up with consensus when people have different business models, and the technology is moving, and so it's not easy to do. And when you do it, and this is what we do, the industry groups say, whoa, wait a second, it's too soon for that. You're going to restrict that. Someone's going to make that a law. You're going to create liability. You're blah, blah, supporting one business model over another. And then the advocates say, well, it's not good enough. That still leaves companies doing that, then that's not good enough. And so it's really hard. You need a thick skin, and you can talk really fast like I do. But I urge you to, look, these are things that can change. It's called self-regulation. But it's not really just self-regulation in the market. It's, I commit to it, and I can be the subject of enforcement once I've made a public representation. The FTC can take action against me. So do some real rulemaking to set some norms for your industry, and then they can be updated over time, even though they're going to be imperfect. That's what can be done to advance trust.
And it's interesting because we are here at an AR standards meeting, and of course one of the things I'll remind everybody that I know about standards is remember The purpose of the standard is to make some of the people happy some of the time, not to make all the people happy all the time. You will inevitably, not satisfy everyone simply because you've reached a point of consensus. And that's a really important thing to keep in mind as you move forward with this activity and as we move forward into the question and answer phase of this. And speaking as someone from a standards organization, for those of you who are new, I see a couple new faces. I didn't introduce myself. My name is Mary Lynn Nielsen. I'm the Technology Initiative Director of the IEEE Standards Association. And right now, I'd like to invite your questions of our panelists. Please just raise your hand. Christine will bring the mic to you, and hopefully that'll pick it up for everybody to hear.
So I've got 3 questions so far. Simon, Tony, and Blair.
So I'm Simon Solodko, and I created a project to specifically do the social augmented reality experiment called All Future Parties. So later, if anyone wants to do the experiment and see what you're comfortable saying in social augmented reality, you'll be able to come over here and try it out. My question is simply, I believe, and so just respond to the statement, I believe social augmented reality creates a new kind of social network because the kind of data that I'm able or willing to convey online is probably a lot different than the kind of information I would want you to know about me here or in different contexts. And I thought it was a really good point to point out. At Disney World, that's one context that's probably really important. But begin to paint the picture, what kind of new social network might be required around real space data?
So, I'm not sure it's a new social network, it may be new social norms, ways of interacting, so the rules that we recognize that they may not be written down. So for example, I tend to think about the people who are in your field of view, because those are the people who may not know that they're in your reality, but you're a participant as well, and so there may be new ways of interacting with people. Like for example, I don't know how to do this is a horrible example, but hey, you're a registered sex offender. In a bar or something, and that person may say, no, I've never been that whatsoever, wherever you're getting that information from is totally incorrect, and that may provide you a feedback loop to help make that data more accurate. I don't know, I'm just saying there may be things like that involve interaction between the augmenter and the augmentee that allow you to create something that everyone feels better about and feels is more trustworthy.
Has anyone read A Super Sad True Love Story by Gary Steiner?
I got told to read it.
You got to read it because, look, if Facebook or LinkedIn or social media profiles or avatars in virtual worlds have kind of opened up a new kind of interaction, this is what when they take it to the augmented reality real world, and it's going to obviously open up a interesting layer, which is just like Facebook, going to either be really wonderful, connect with the old friends, or see that everyone's done better than you in life, or be bored, or be annoyed, or all the drama that comes out, right? And for our generation, some drama. For another generation, it's like massive drama. They've got to flee it, go to Twitter or whatever it is. And so if you read Super Sad True Love Story by Gary Steiner, it's both the good and the evil, right? You go into a bar today, with a certain kind of environment. If you knew more about the people and they knew more about you, you might make more friends better, or you might be really more oppressed because of the kinds of things that we might now need to hide or share. So I think we're in a great new world.
Social AR, yeah, that's really where the minefields are, I think, for this in particular. I'd like to turn it over to the next question, Tony.
Hi, I'm Tony. I'm from Cornell University. So my question is about this bucket issue, and it's easy to offload a lot of this onto the designers themselves. But I was wondering what sort of heuristics you might give to designers, either in terms of Helena Long's contextual integrity framework that says, nothing is inherently private. It's only the different groups that get access to or possess that information across a variety of contexts, and that integrity is important to provide. Or something like Lawrence Lessig's latent ambiguities question, where it says that there are multiple reasons why something might be wrong, but when technology isolates one, pulls that up, and doesn't do the other, then we have to decide against these sort of competing values that we hold as societies. So I was just wondering, where you come from a legal perspective on dealing with those questions, but also sort of how you might advise developers more specifically in terms of some of those heuristics or values in design.
So I was a postdoc with Helen Isabel for a year, and I love her idea of contextual integrity. One of the key elements of that is being able to define context. So, we use these, like the bar, for example, or the gym. There's ones that you guys think about that are qualitatively different, or maybe different because there's certain laws that make them different, like the DMV or I don't know, whatever. But one thing that you can do to sort of take some of the weight off of the designers is develop a cookbook, so to speak, of contexts and things that are sort of a consensus-based heuristics for operations in those contexts. You may have, I can easily imagine bars a year from now where there are glass allowed, maybe it'll be a less branded version versus glass prohibited kinds of environments, and people may choose to go to those specifically because of that reason. I think having a cookbook of contexts and thinking hard about those and allowing people to sort of amend those and add to them and think through those things is a great way to do some of that offering.
I did a TEDx called something like Sex and Food and Privacy, because I think it's really hard to have a good cookbook, right? You see when these colleges try to decide whether women can be in the men's rooms or vice versa, it's like it's allowed as long as there's always like 2 feet on the floor, or when they try to define date rape consent stuff, it can be so hard and so nuanced, right? And so, if I bought a phone and started interacting with my, shoes, I'd be like, what's going on? If it was a Nike phone, it should be like, why'd I get a Nike phone, right? Where does brand fit in? Where, in some places we rip context, and that's what's cool about it. We took data from there, and we're using it here, and we created some new advantage, and it's out of context until we adjust our mental model. So I think it's really nuanced. I go into your house, we're old frat buddies, I'm going to go and get food out of your refrigerator, right? We're guests, and I met for the first time in a sort of a business relationship. I can wait until you offer me some food, right? There is going to be a different dynamic, and different people are going to be a little more aggressive, and different companies might have permission to do more because of the relationship that they had with you. The mistake companies make is they send you like an email on Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving. I'm not in a relationship with you. You got a bargain for me on Thanksgiving? Fine, but don't wish me happy holidays. It bothers me. Someone else? No, that's nice. Walmart is sending me a holiday card. Maybe it's like we're respecting our boundaries.
I think it raises a really interesting point too, which is a lot of what we look at now in AR is push, that you're going to be pushing information out to the user of the app, tool, whatever that you have out there to supply. At what point are we actually making that more of a two-way street, more of an integral conversation? Are there parameters that you can create to say, this is what I would like to know from you? If you tell me what you are seeking, I better identify that. And that ties a little bit to where you said, if you have a feedback loop to say, for heaven's sake, if you ever send me another Happy Thanksgiving note, I'm going to cut off all business. If there's some sort of responsiveness that you can gauge, Jules doesn't want that note, but Kevin does, then you're going to be able to work within that framework. And part of it is realizing that we're thinking of it as a one-way street, but I'm not necessarily sure it is.
There's one more question out here.
So actually, I have two questions. I actually just want, I'm going back and from Georgia Tech. I want to agree with what you were saying. I think the idea that a lot of people have about meta reality is one of a big bucket of data. Somehow if things get published, then they're out there for everyone to see. And I don't think that will happen. I think it'll be much more like the web where you choose to receive certain stuff, right? You get the branded Nike data. My question actually was different, which is, when people talk about augmented reality, and a few of you did, they combined sensing and display. So I am in a bar and I scan your face and I know who you are and I display stuff around you. From a legal policy perspective, I think my intuition is those things will be separate in the way that you can put cameras up or not. You can, there's copyright in other law, you can display certain people's images or not, you can use people's brands or not. And so, what's your thought on whether we should be thinking of these things as separable issues? Can I display whatever I want in my AR glasses in a bar with you as a separate issue from, can I scan all your faces and learn as much as I can about all the people around me Because those are actually very different things, right? If I haven't scanned you, I don't know anything about you except maybe that you have broadcast a beacon saying who you are to people so they know who you are, then that's a very different issue. And so I'm just curious if you think that you might split those things.
Well, I'll start with that, and I'm not sure if you're trying to split them, whether they're going to be split from a legal standpoint. You may see it that way from a technical standpoint, but I'm not sure that necessarily the users or more the person, the people that are around you, right?
Yeah, so for example, there could be cameras in here
Right.
that are scanning everybody
Right.
and doing the sensing, and you've come to this event, blah, 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 you've maybe given me permission, and then I could somehow be hooked in and displaying things above your heads, and I could imagine that there could be laws about what you could install in a space versus what you could carry on your body. And at the end, it's still me displaying your home address above your head so I can go rob you.
So the way that I see things going, and I'm not saying this is the right way or the wrong way, but when that forum is collecting that information, they're going to have to deal with a body of law, regulation, and policy on what they can do with it, what permission they need to get, how they need to store it, who they can share it with, all these things, right? And so that same law, subject to some variation, is going to apply whether it's collected by the venue that you're at, or whether it's collected by the augmented reality device or the camera on your glasses or whatever. A lot of the laws are going to be the same. So it's the data, and that's why I went through the long list of questions. To me, it's the data that people are looking at. I think it's important to focus on the context and think about all that. But I think about what data is coming in, who's getting it, what data is coming out, and what they're doing with it. And when you look at it that way, I'm not sure there's going to be that much of a distinction between what you're suggesting. But the others may disagree.
I'd like to, before we continue the panel, I just want to ask you, apologize to John, because we're going to end the panel in just one or two summarizing statements. I'll give the microphone back so Marilyn can close up the panel. And I want to ask if you guys would be amenable to working on something that Tony suggested, sort of some guidelines, kind of as a next step, perhaps, to this panel. And I want to let others know that on Friday, the 28th of March, there will be a Google Hangout on the topic of privacy and augmented reality that the IEEE SA is hosting. And Jules is one of the panelists, and there are others who will be joining us for that hangout, so on the same topic. Thank you.
I'll follow up with you.
So I think what we revealed from this today is that, like it is in so many ways when we deal with trust, privacy, and security, we think on a level we understand it, and the more we explore it, the thornier the thick it becomes. So with that in mind, I'm going to quickly pass the mic down to everybody, and you get 1 minute to say your summation thoughts, and then I'll close. Starting with Joe.
Thanks for making awesome stuff. Hopefully it's responsibly awesome.
I guess I would say I think it's really valuable that you're thinking about these issues now and trying to figure out how to best address them, whether it be through meetings and develop some potential policies or things, but at least thinking about them, because I think that's going to be increasingly important and make it more likely that you are going to be able to develop responsible stuff.
I haven't seen the lawyers or policymakers solve any privacy problem in 15 years. I'm looking to the technologists and the creative people who are going to hack transparency, who are going to do the cool new thing. All we're doing is writing privacy policies and trying to make them easier to read. The ways you might envision artificial reality privacy policies, cues, bumps, belches, symbols, icons, I don't know, things that I, as a lawyer, am not imagining. I wouldn't have told Facebook to have a dinosaur give me some privacy advice today, but somehow that seems to be working. I think the next generation of communicating to users about data is not going to be about privacy. Data is increasingly a feature, and if we can, come up with a way to drive a complicated car without teaching someone, you get in the car, once you've learned how to drive, you drive. My browser, I somehow learned how to drive my browser. There's all kinds of stuff happening. I don't know how to use all the other features. I think if you're able to design data as a feature so that it works intuitively in the way people expect, and there's stuff that happens under the hood that most people don't understand, but nothing seems to go wrong, so it's okay, I think we've got a path forward. So I'm putting it in your hand because I don't think we've solved the problem. And the last thought I'll say is one of the thorniest issues that we certainly are debating, so no one's going to give you great guidance, is what happens to privacy in public. We used to have some of it. Unless you were a celebrity, unless you were walking down the block where your neighbors were, you assumed you kind of were inconspicuous and anonymous. And much of what we're doing today is somehow coming up with ways to use that data, identify, count, track, and we don't have good models. There are folks saying, let's get the friction back. Forget that it's public, it's free. We can't tell you not to see people, and just because you're recording it, that doesn't necessarily change it. So we haven't figured out the legal construct for that, and that's going to be one of the issues I think we spend a lot of time thinking about.
So we definitely need SLAs around the concept of privacy. And that will be the interesting thing to try to explore. So I'd like to thank Jules, Kevin, and Joe, I think, for a very interesting and dynamic discussion. I thank you all for your attention.